Hello, I'm Tracy Lester. I'm the executive director here at the Center for Fiction. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our space here in Fort Greene, Brooklyn, and welcome to our guests who are live streaming with us tonight. The Center for Fiction is a literary nonprofit organization that's dedicated to the creation and enjoyment of fiction and the art of storytelling in all its forms. Tonight, we are delighted to gather for an in-person reading with the Susan Camel 2021-2022 Emerging Writer Fellows. The fellowship is at the heart of what we do, and it is one of our signature programs created over a decade ago. I want to take a moment to thank some of our supporters for the fellowship: the Jerome Foundation, the Amazon Literary Partnership, Penguin Random House, and many of the contributors to the Center for Fiction's Susan Camel Award for Emerging Writers. I want to just share one housekeeping note before we begin the program. While you're in the space, please leave your mask on unless you're actively eating or drinking. Now, I'm going to just move this program along and invite up to the stage Randy Winston, who's our writing programs manager, and he's going to set the stage for you about the evening and introduce the fellows. So thank you so much.
Hello. How's everyone doing? All right, we're going to get there. I want to thank a few folks before we get started. Matt Kafori, our webmaster who designed this year's anthology front to back. Celeste Kaufman, who runs our social and shares this information about our events, especially about the fellowship via newsletter. Tracy, our ED, who's been helpful with helping me flesh out my ideas and also saying yes to crazy things that I have for events, as you all will see as this year unfolds. Melanie McNair and Eliana and our events interns for all the work that they do. Jory, our bookstore manager, and our bookstore staff. Scott, who's our cafe and bar manager, and his staff as well, and all of my colleagues upstairs on the members floor. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to make nights like tonight possible. So thank you all. This is a culmination of all those efforts. So thank everyone for that. Welcome to the first installment of 2 readings of the 2021-2022 Emerging Writer Fellowship. I do the writing programs here at the Center for Fiction. This, as Tracy mentioned, the center is a home for lovers of reading and writing and storytelling of all its forms. And in that home, I oversee wings, okay? So this is a big home, like an estate, if you will. And one of my favorite wings of the house is the Susan Camel Emerging Writer Fellowship. The fellowship is in its 11th year. That's 9 fellows annually. That's close to 100 writers. We're going into 100 writers with our 12th cohort in the fall. That have been impacted by this program. The selected 9 New York-based writers are given $5,000 and granted access to all of the center's resources, including our library, collection, workshops, community events, discounts in the bookstore, and most importantly, a place to come and write in our writer studio. We also give our fellows access to our network. They are paired with editors in the industry, a mentorship model, and meet publishing professionals such as agents, senior editors, authors, VPs, and publishers in an intimate setting via our monthly dinner series. I say to the fellows often, the function of this fellowship is to equip you with the knowledge and tools needed to navigate this industry, not just as writers, but as literary citizens. That's the work. My hope is that this work continues well after this fellowship cycle has ended, that all you hear and watching at home remember nights like tonight, when many of you will have heard from these talented writers for the very first time. Now tonight, the work is these words they're about to hit y'all with, so buckle up. Quick overview. The anthology is what all of our fellows will be reading from. These are unpublished and published works. This is annual, so every cohort puts together an anthology and we publish it. It will be on sale in the bookstore for $7. The rules for tonight: 2 to 3 minutes for each writer, maximum. At the 3 minute mark, I may have Eliana in the back raise her hand. At 15 seconds, I might play some music. And anything over that, I might cut the AC off in the heat wave. All right? There's 9 readers total. We will do 2 to 3 minutes each. 5 of our fellows could not be here tonight, so they will join us virtually. You will see 2 videos first, then we'll go in-person, virtual, in-person, virtual, until we reach 9, all right? My job is to get you out of here on time. If we're done by 8 o'clock, some of you can go home and watch Chicago Fire or Shark Tank. So let's get started with our first reader of the night.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jared Jackson. I wish I could be there with you this evening, but I'm away riding at Yaddo. I want to give a big thank you to the Center for Fiction, Randy, and everyone else behind the scenes who made tonight happen. I also want to give a big congratulations to my cohort. Tonight I'll be reading an excerpt from a short story that's part of my collection titled Locals. The name of this story is Blanca. What to say about Blanca? She was the woman Tio messed with around the time I learned what messing with meant. Even with other women, joints from the North End, Jamaicans, Bajans, Trinis. After he punched out from work, over by the Ave, in the Caribbean social clubs, he'd drink beer, play pool, and gamble away what we lived week to week on for a chance with whatever unfortunate woman caught his eye. These women have for real accents that wrapped around your ears. I'd hear them before I see them, listen to the rhythm of their words, the things they say to Tia late at night, like, "What ya say? How you doing?" And Tio? He never said nothing back, but I could picture him in his forever sunken face, heavy with lack of sleep, booze, and regret. Maybe these women thought their questions came out wrong, like maybe that's why Tio didn't respond. But that wasn't it. Tio was just an asshole. It wasn't long before these women figured it out too, or that's what I assumed, because they came and left like the circus. Blanca was different. She stayed around, learned more about her than just what her perfume smelled like dancing down the hallway. She had these large, watery eyes like they'd leak if she blinked. Una morena with her frail frame that looked no older than the girls in my 6th grade class. When I first heard Blanca through the threadbare walls of our apartment, there was no headboard knocking or loud squeaking beds. Only her screams, her sharp cries like she was in pain, which left me confused. You see, that year, my boys and I began talking about the things our parents did at night. I didn't know if Tia was fucking her, or beating her, or both. I mean, I knew Tia, a big dude with a pregnant stomach who could be as violent as a bowling ball striking pins. But when I described the noises to the older boys, they didn't sweat it. They said women sounded like that because they liked it. That you only knew you were handling your business if it sounded like it hurt. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gina Chung, and I'm going to be reading to you from my short story, The Sound of Water. Justin had just finished watering his mother's plants when Ellie Park, 18 years older than when he'd last seen her, walked into his family's convenience store. It was a slow summer day. A fan rotated in the corner sluggishly. "Can I get a pack of Marlboro Lights?" He looked up from his phone and squinted at the woman who stood in front of him. She wore sunglasses and tapped her fingernails distractedly against the countertop. A cloud of rose perfume tickled his nose. "Ellie?" he said. He felt the back of his neck tingle as he said her name, told himself it couldn't be her. He'd last heard she was living somewhere in New York City, maybe, or Boston, and that she was married. She lowered her sunglasses. "Holy shit! Justin? Is that you?" He felt himself blush as he reached for the cigarettes. "Could you get me a lighter, too?" she said, fishing around in her purse. "White," she added, before he could ask her what color. "On me," he said. "I can't believe you're still buying white lighters." "Old habits die hard," she said. "And you don't have to do that." but her hands were already closing around the carton of cigarettes and the lighter he had slid across the countertop. He tried to keep his hands from trembling. He could still remember cupping his hand around the flame of her cigarette in his parents' driveway the night she and his older brother James broke up, right after their high school graduation. He had been walking home from a party when she called out to him from her beat-up old Camry, her voice a little husky. When he got closer, he could see she'd been crying. "Want to go for a drive?" she said. "I could use some company." She'd offered him a cigarette as well, and he'd taken it, even though Coach J would kill him if he knew. The smell of Ellie's rose perfume and the clean, hot flame had made him feel dizzy. She wore her hair shorter now, and it was tinted a reddish gold that didn't quite suit her. Her face had narrowed with time, and there was a slight tiredness around her eyes. But she looked good. Better than good. She still had freckles, he noticed, a small scattering of them across her cheekbones. She was the only Korean girl he'd ever seen with freckles. "What are you doing back in town?" he asked. He wondered with sudden self-consciousness how he must look to her, whether she could tell his swimmer's muscles had softened over the years. He wished he had showered that morning. "Just seeing my parents," she said, after a brief pause. "How are yours? How's James?" He told her that James was living in San Francisco now, and if her eyes betrayed a hint of interest or regret when he mentioned that James's wife was pregnant, he couldn't tell. "I should get going," she said. "Tell your parents I said hi." He watched as she got into a shiny black Corolla parked outside. He could make out a small form sitting in the front seat, a boy of about 8 or 9 years old, and as they peeled out of the parking lot, he felt an old, familiar ache behind his ribs. A kid. "Thank you."
Folks, in the spirit of acknowledging the revelations of the first new images of James Webb's telescope, the Center for Fiction, all about storytelling here, how galaxies interact and how the collisions between galaxies drive star formations. I asked tonight's readers, our in-person readers, to share with me who they'd be in another galaxy or in an alternate universe. Our third reader tonight is Cindy George. In another universe, she would probably be one of those people who makes tiny food videos, cooking tiny plates of bacon and eggs with tiny skillets. I figured they'd be cast iron skillets on the tiny stoves. Don't know if you've seen it, but it's the most soothing thing ever. She'll be reading Home, her submission for this year's Emerging Writer Anthology. Cindy, will you read for us, please?
Thank you. I think it's 3 minutes. He found their missing planter up the street, near the parking lot of the Kingdom Hall. Someone had dragged it to the curb, scraping off the tiny gold flakes that, in better times, had risen to form a pattern around the pot's neck. Now its neck was no more, and soil spilled from a crack in its middle, and it was missing one of its impossibly small handles, which had not been designed for any useful purpose, but seemed to Kwame like a major loss anyway. They'd kept it at the front of the house since moving to the neighborhood, as a marker in the driveway to help his stepson park straight. The boy had bad habits as a driver and otherwise, and although Kwame had tried once to seize his car keys, his wife Tavon had made him return them. Before it was taken, the planter had been her prize find, marked down 40% at the Edison Home Depot. Kwame had not wanted to get out of the car while she and his mother shopped, but they'd pretended, as they sometimes did, to care about his opinion, and he had not been given a choice. To spite them, he'd refused to say anything positive about the pot, or the brightly colored flowers that went in it, or anything else in their cart that they thought the house needed. But now, examining the mess of broken ceramic, even he had to admit that he'd liked it. A few of the neighbors would have seen it in the gutter and known it to be his. The friendly thing would have been to ring his bell or leave a note to somehow mention it, but their neighbors weren't friendly people. The neighbors, his mother said when he returned to their yard. She looked at him as she often did, as if he did not fully comprehend the situation. Listen, the damn thing didn't take up itself, one of the neighbors took it. She was excited. She hated trouble. She expected trouble. She was relieved when trouble finally arrived. And when they walked off, they saw that it was heavy, and bloop, she continued, making a dropping motion with her hands. They'd hired a security company to wire sensors along the windows. Remember how that was my idea? Kwame said. That's inside, this is outside, she said. What does one have to do with the other? His mother, who was in her 80s and dressed always as if she had somewhere to be, like an old-fashioned black starlet, like a supreme, rang the buzzer and called Tavon down from the top floor. His wife called his stepson up from the basement apartment, which should have been the rental unit, although his stepson did not pay rent. The boy, Robert, whistled for the dog, a beagle that barked at Kwame and Kwame alone, as if he were an intruder in his own home. And the dog came with a chew toy in his mouth and hope in his eyes. The four of them lined up like onlookers at a parade to watch Kwame walk from their house to the planter, from the planter to their house, searching the pavement for clues. It was hot for September, but he kept his suit jacket on. The tongue of his tie was thrown over his shoulder, giving him the appearance of a choking man. He was a certified public accountant for a township in central Jersey, and he turned onto his street each evening with a sigh. Kwame insisted on carrying the broken pot back, although his wife worried about his suit jacket, which was new, and his mother accused him of having lifted the thing incorrectly, bending at the waist instead of the knees. He tried to fit the parts together at the side of the driveway, as if it were a puzzle to be solved. Who would do that, he said? Who would steal a stupid flower pot? Robert's window looked out onto the driveway, and the boy was home all day. He should have seen or heard something, but he had seen or heard nothing. You think it's because we're black, Robert said. There any other black families on the street? If you left the basement, you would know. If you put down the video games, you'd see who lives here. Kwame made the sound as damning as possible, although their best interactions, the times when he thought they might be friends, had come from playing those games together. The Jehovah's Witnesses, you know they're out here more than anybody else, right? You ever think they might be doing some illegal shit? Think about it, they're basically a religious gang. Robert spoke as if he wanted to be taken seriously, but this was often a ruse. And how do we know that's all they took? What else y'all keep out here? Did anybody check? Whoever it is, they're lucky I didn't see them, Kwame said. You would have what? Robert laughed. He was taller than Kwame, though he rarely stood at his full height. You haven't seen me mad. Not really, Kwame said. Tavon smiled, his mother smiled, his stepson smiled meanly.
Hi, I'm Mary Wang. Luckily, living as a ghost in the Netherlands wasn't that different from living in the Netherlands while alive. I didn't have many people to speak to either way, and I had already gotten used to a certain aimlessness. After my death, I had hoped that I would at least turn as white as the foreigners here. Unfortunately, I, like the ghosts back home, was invisible. In the mornings, I would sit in our little fridge of an apartment and watch my husband get dressed, make Lan Lan breakfast. He always added too much water to the congee, and without me around, it slowly turned into rice water. Our daughter, however, slurped it up. Though my dishes were always more exquisite and nutritious, it was her pa's food our girl ate without complaint. After breakfast, I would follow Lan Lan to school. She'd hop on her bike and cycle through our street, which was lined with more trees than I'd seen in our entire Guangzhou neighborhood. She'd pedal past the pious morning crowd shuffling into the train station and arrive at the building 15 or so minutes later. While I was still alive, I often asked her to take the tram. The Dutch wind was too fierce for her constitution, and cycling was giving her thick calves. But nowadays, her dad let her leave without a coat, sometimes even in short skirts. He was a traditional medicine doctor, but lived up the reassuring appearance of his white robe, and all you'll find underneath is a pathological need to please his child. As a dutiful mother, I lingered around for Lan Lan's morning classes. Hovering above the teenagers bent over their desks, I'd keep an eye on who was copying whose homework and who was bikini shopping on their iPhone. Lan Lan did none of those things, since she preferred the company of books to that of her peers. Which made me proud, because why waste time with people for whom drawing was a form of study and asking questions a sign of intellect? Once satisfied with Lan Lan's academic activities, I'd return to the train station, now as hollow and serene as a temple, and exit on the Chinatown side to visit my husband's business. His practice sat between a Chinese bakery and a Suriname canteen, so I could just float in through the cracks between the door, alongside wafts of egg tarts and curry chicken. I often told my husband that he went to university to study this, so could he please explain why he was charging Chinese prices to people making Dutch wages? But he couldn't hear me, even if I sometimes managed to break a glass or two. I like to end my days at the port, where I'd hover along the water. I have to admit that the Maas is very beautiful and grand, not too dissimilar from the Pearl River. I could tell by my reflection in the water that my lips were still plump and my figure trim, and it made me sad knowing that other people were no longer able to see me. I couldn't believe I had left my country behind, and my elderly mother, and my facialist, just to become a ghost in this subarctic fiefdom. But all I could do was to close my eyes and listen to the water smashing against the shore and pretend, just for a moment, as if I was back in Guangzhou. You'd think that a ghost like me could go anywhere I liked, but every time I tried to hitch a ride on the wind, something this place had no lack of, I found myself getting stuck in the same weather pattern and blown right back. Thank you.
Our fifth reader tonight is Na Zong. Now, I love your answer to this. Na would love to visit Penelope, wife of Odysseus, and grab her by the shoulders and urge her, stop revising. She will be reading an excerpt from my mother's fiction, her novel in progress and submission for this year's anthology. Na, will you read for us, please?
Honestly, I won't be able to finish this revision without the love and support from the center and my fellow fellows. So thank you so much. I'm going to read from my novel, My Mother's Fiction, where a mother competes with her daughter to tell her own stories. The excerpt that I'm going to read happens in a shopping mall where the protagonist is taken on a shopping trip by her future parents-in-law, and she isn't very happy about it. The saleswoman jumped to her feet as soon as they came in. Her eyes followed them closely, a professional smile gathering on her face, ready to beam at the real decision-maker in this group. After a few seconds of observation and evaluation, she approached Xue Mei correctly. "Ma'am, anything particular you're looking for?" Elegantly, Xue Mei turned around and pointed at Nin, who was lagging a few steps behind. "Not for me. Have you got anything for our young lady here?" "Well, of course." The saleswoman swerved towards Nin, compensating for her misjudgment with extra enthusiasm. "What are you looking for, miss?" Nin greeted her with an uncertain smile. "I'm not sure." The woman cast a quick glance at Xue Mei and said reassuringly, "Take your time, take your time." It was a small shop, a U-shaped clothes rack at the center, facing 3 walls hung with garments. In 5 minutes, Ning circled half of the shop, having surveyed the rack without touching anything, and was making her way towards the exit when the woman called her from behind. "Miss, how do you like this one?" She stopped briefly, throwing a cursory glance at the apple green coat in the woman's hand. "I'm good, thank you." "How about this then?" Xue Mei pointed to a blue and white dress shaped exactly like a porcelain vase. Ning strained a smile at her. "Sorry." The woman scanned the room anxiously, her face lit up at a neon orange sweater on the wall, a pair of lips printed on its front, red and sensuous. "See that one? That's our most popular item. We sold 5 of them last week. What do you say?" She found a garment hook and tried to fetch the sweater from her tiptoes. Ning stared at it with horror. "No?" The woman paused at the sight of Nin's face, mystified and slightly hurt. but a girl almost cried because we ran out her size. I'm sorry, Nin said. The woman turned to Xue Mei and sighed. You never know what young people like these days. I feel you, Xue Mei said. She took her time browsing the rag, feeling the fabric, exchanging pleasantries with the woman, while Ning and Xiaoyu waited listlessly outside the shop. When she finally sauntered out, she widened her eyes at Nin. You didn't fancy anything back there? What's the rush? Xiaoyu yawned. It's the first shop. It's not like we have to buy anything today. You don't say, Xue Mei snapped. Your father and I have lots to prepare for the holiday. You think we've got all the time in the world to run errands for you? The smile faded from his face. He shrugged and said nothing. Xue Mei changed her strategy at the next shop. She picked out a red trench coat from the rack and said to Nin, What do you think of this one? Nin glanced at the coat uncertainly. It's very nice, but... We'll take it, Xue Mei said to the salesgirl. But auntie, I don't need it. You don't like it? Ning eyed the starched collar, the bow-tied belt, the carved bronze buttons. Her mother would have loved it. It's lovely, but... Can you wrap it up for us? Xue Mei handed her card to the dazed salesgirl. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Josh Borja, and I'm reading from Glimpses. For several years, approximately once every other month in Nanjing, I was told in conversations that I don't look American. For the most part, as I walked around Nanjing each day, it seemed that I could pass for Chinese. Whether or not to pass should be anyone's ultimate goal in life. Or otherwise, on a daily basis, I was assumed from the first to have proficiency in Mandarin, in a way that non-Asian friends and colleagues would not be. In grocery stores, at markets, in cabs, at restaurants, I was often approached by strangers suddenly starting a conversation with me in Mandarin. I would let them know that I don't and may not understand what they're saying. 听不懂, that is, I don't understand, specifically what I'm hearing. Or 我听不懂, or 不好意思, or 我的中文不好, my Chinese is not good. Now that I pause for a moment, I notice it is par for the course, only natural, to affirm my lack of understanding when speaking a language that is not my native language, my mother tongue, both somewhat strange phrases. To say, I don't understand, aloud, several times a week. It seems to me now, in this fleeting luminescence, imperative, to be immersed in the wide-eyed, anxious recognition, mysteries, gentle ghosts, traces. Ordinary images recalled at startling angles. It seems that we are passing through many layers, only one of which being the actual, straightforward story that I had set out to tell. The primary action that I would like to narrate is the conversation itself, in Nanjing, with the strangers I would meet on the street. So let us find our way back. We were talking about the poor survivalist state of my Mandarin, at the family mart, at the glasses market by the railway station, with the street food vendor. In any conversation there would come a time when I must say, 我听不懂, or some variation thereof. More often than not, however, they would yell back at me in disbelief, in Mandarin, What? Or, what do you mean you don't understand? By the time I finished my in-person teaching appointments in Nanjing, 听不懂 had become one of my most practiced phrases, perhaps the closest, most convincing I could ever hope to get to sounding Chinese from China. To empathize with their shock, it's as if you were to walk into my office, to ask me, Excuse me, do you know where the chemistry lab is? And to hear me say, entirely in some variety of English, with pronunciations you may have heard in one English-speaking discourse community or another, I'm sorry, I don't speak English.
Our seventh reader tonight is Katie Yee. Katie, in another galaxy or alternative universe, Katie would be a therapist, plant shop owner. The therapy sessions would take place in the plant shop. She'll be reading The Dog is Choking on a Chicken Bone, her submission for this year's anthology. Katie, will you read first?
Thank you, Randy. Sunny, I feel like your characters would really enjoy my therapy plant shop. And thank you, everyone, for coming. This is so nice to be here in person. All right, I'll get on with it. It is my turn to try to bring the plants back to life. My brother and I take turns, and today it is his turn to feed the dog, so he is in the kitchen. I start in the den, where there is the least light. It is musty in here because Dad keeps the windows and blinds sealed shut. It is like the house is holding its breath, like it is trying to keep a secret. There is only one plant in the den. It is a domesticated tree. Pretty small but sprawling, shedding its brown leaves. I hoist it up in my arms, careful to drape the dying leaves over myself so as not to crush them, and walk it over to our bedroom. I put it by the one window, then I pour the water like I always do. I make swirls in the soil and watch it darken. Then I take the overgrown aloe plant that was sitting there, soaking up limited light, to the bathroom. The cycle goes on. We've been experimenting, Dylan and me, with different spots in the house, rotating them, bringing them closer to the sun. That's not all. Last year, second place in the science fair went to a kid who showed classical music helps plants grow. Now we play a lot of Mozart in the house despite not liking it. We turn the volume up loud enough that we can feel the violins and the floorboards. Today, the plants are looking particularly sad. We turn the volume up so high that I don't hear Dylan when he says, "The dog is choking on a chicken bone." He has to tap me on the shoulder to get my attention. It is Tuesday, early evening, and we are alone in the house again. In the kitchen, I see the half bucket of fried chicken left over from last night's dinner open on the counter. There are a few drumsticks in the dog's bowl, peeled and pale. The dog is hunched over it, making deep, gurgling sounds. "I didn't mean to," Dylan says. He's got a pile of the fried skins on his own plate, untouched. They look soggy. We wrap the dog in a blanket, even though it is not cold outside, because on the TV shows, when something bad happens, the people the bad things happen to get wrapped up like babies, and they seem calmer or maybe just smaller and taken care of. "We should call 911, I say. It is the only thing I can think of." "Not after last time," Dylan says. "Last time we called 911, they did not take us seriously. It turns out that not having a mom does not count as an emergency if she leaves on her own and is safe and has done no harm to us that people can see. Last time we called 911, the paramedics came. They pulled up to the front of the house at the same time as Dad. We watched them talking from between the blinds, but couldn't hear what they were saying. Dad talks with his hands, though. He was making wild gestures. We'd seen them before. He was telling the paramedics about our mom leaving. He tells it to anyone who will listen. He always says, "and then she just takes off," with the right-hand gesture like a backhand slap. They told us not to be the boy who cried wolf. After the paramedics left, Dad got mad and did harm that people could see but chose not to. Then he explained about the 911 blocked list. We were on it now. They would never send help. The bruises were blamed on the dog. The dog is coughing a lot and still choking on the chicken bone. We put the dog in a stroller we found folded and tucked under Dad's bed, and we take it to Kidsler's, the clothing shop for infants around the corner, because up until 3 weeks ago, it had been the Oceanside Animal Clinic. The door still chimes when you open it, but the inside looks different now. There are no more cages with kittens that you can take home to love. There are no small dishes of water that are easy to trip over and spill. There are lots of tiny socks all over the walls and dresses the dog could probably fit into. There are real gumballs in the gumball machine, not just milk bones. The dog is sticking its tongue out and making sounds like a radiator. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caleb Gale, and I'm going to be reading a short excerpt from my piece in the Anthology called Smile. It's 2:13 a.m. The grid lines on the spreadsheet have blurred into dancing lines with the white powder your boss snorts to ensure that his spreadsheet grid lines don't start dancing but stay stiff no matter the hour. Click, click, pound, shift F9, control alt, whatever the fuck, the keys still keep punching. Season 5 of episode 3 on Veep already. Been up too damn long. Started the day on season 2 or 3. That's how you track how long you've been working, how many episodes pass, providing the sounds that interrupt the longer sounds that send your heart beating during the 20-hour workdays. Usually you time it by the amount of times the 24-hour news cycle repeats itself, or how many times Wolf Blitzer, Anderson Cooper, or Allison Camerata flash across the TV screen, but the news is ugly. With stories of an orange figure not believing science who convinced millions more to also ignore science. So then they die, and the people they're around also die because the disease is airborne. 2 of your uncles just got snuffed out because someone presumably who didn't believe in science went to their nursing homes and breathed on, in, or near them. Now, the news is too damn personal, not to mention cops are home invading while y'all are sleeping in homes shooting while y'all are jogging, asphyxiating while y'all are shopping, even when one of y'all is crying out for mama. Nah, you have to keep your bedroom sounds filled with the comedy of this alternate universe of a female vice president with a potty mouth and a staff who's more foul-mouthed yet just as ineffective. If you listen to anything else, you might ask that boss for some of that gridline stiffening white powder, because this is working from home. 10 a.m. The automated sound of your manager's Slack message. Answer it. No, don't answer it. The clear bubble says you are offline. The manager should know you're busy, that you're not available, that you logged off for the day. Your status says away. Boundaries have been set, you tell yourself, and he better not cross that boundary. But fuck the boundaries. Don't get fired. Don't miss that bonus. You need that shit. You need that shit ×2, because in your head you spent it ×3. So open Slack, the app that controls when you go to bed and when you wake up, but make sure to shroud itself in the playful colors of red, green, and yellowish orange. The message comes in and the manager asks a question you know is a command, but you can't do anything else but say yes because your bonus performance depends on it. Jeff, are you up? Do you mind adjusting the color of the slides you put together? Yeah, every single one of them. I know that sounds like a lot, 250 slides, but hey, big meeting tomorrow. You're a champ, bud. You consider responding with, sure thing, I'm on it. And while I'm at it, I hope you find out your wife is pleasuring herself with devices that vibrate the way your phone does when the senior partner calls to yell at you. But you know it's not that clever. His wife probably does get her rocks off with flesh, not just rubber, and you know it just won't fly. Plus, it's better to kind of imagine that she's fucking the senior partner in a way more pleasurable and consensual than the ways the senior partner fucks your boss. So instead, you stop at, sure thing. That's the best thing about Slack and email and text. You can make people feel whatever you want them to feel with exclamation points, LOLs, and smiling emojis, when all you actually want to do is find a way to ruin your boss's day just as much as he's ruined yours. Thank you all.
Our last reader of the night is Jennifer Liu. In an alternate universe, she would be a toss-up between Mortal Kombat characters and a UFC champion, because she loves to fight for your attention and she plays to win. She will be reading from her anthology submission titled Once. Jen, will you read for us, please?
Thank you, Randy. I emailed you before to say that it was all about the delivery on that one, and I thank you. I think he delivered. We made it, y'all. This is the end. Woo! Let's give a round of applause for everyone who's here and who couldn't be here. Thank you again to Randy, Tracy, all the staff at the space, and my beautiful cohort. Thank you so much for being here and sharing space with me. So I'm going to read from a short story called Once. I think all you need to know is that Julia is a writer who is returning to Beijing on a writing residency for the first time in 10 years. And while she's there, she's also reflecting on a messy love triangle that she's left behind. Of all the inconveniences of the space, Julia hated the bathroom the most. There was no distinct bathtub, just a shower head that extended over the toilet and a drain in the middle of the tile blue floor. She remembered a bathroom like this in her grandparents' apartment in Shanghai, a place that she had visited once when she was 13. She could recall the scent of camphor that filled the room and the cockroaches that scurried into the corners when she flicked on the lights at night. Now over 20 years had passed, and her grandparents were both dead. When her parents had mentioned their deaths to her several years ago, she realized that she didn't even know her grandparents' first names. China was filled with shiny, modern things, but the bathroom design hadn't changed since she was a child. Julia hated it then as she hated it now. The experience of all the surfaces getting wet at once, the vast boundarylessness of things. This boundarylessness replicated itself in the way that her neighbors outside of the compound lived their private life on the streets, in the card games and drinking parties held on the sidewalks at night, and in the laundry strung like jewelry across apartment buildings. Earlier that summer, before leaving New York, she had slept with one of her friends, a white man named Colin who happened to be her best friend's ex. She spent the weekend before her flight at his place, dozing off in his clean white bed while he sat typing notes on his computer. He worked part-time at a magazine while studying for a master's in sociology. Every now and then, she tried to coax his attention away from the screen by rubbing her hand across his sheets in play seduction, but he remained unmoved, his handsome face concentrated on the dissertation in front of him. Towards evening, as she lay in his bed reading, she heard his housemate poke his head through the door. "Is she still here?" he asked. Colin smiled at her before shooing his roommate away. "Stay as long as you want," he said, kissing her on the forehead before pressing his body firmly on top of hers. She took his middle and left ring finger deep into her mouth while they fucked, but in the morning before work, he stroked her hand as though she were a sick aunt, a sweet but tiresome invalid. "When do you come back to New York?" he asked. "In 8 weeks," she said. She shifted her body to the edge of the bed. The morning was hot and muggy. She imagined the comfort of a cold shower and remembered the luggage that still needed to be packed and tended to. "How will you keep yourself busy?" "I'm sure I'll find a way," he said. He smiled to reveal trim white teeth. In college, where they had first met, she learned that Colin had never worn braces, had 20/20 vision. Good breeding, her friends had joked at the time. Talk of his attractiveness spilled loose across campus. Julia had always equated his looks with a lack of seriousness, a dint of intelligence. She rolled her eyes at him whenever he attempted to charm other women. It happened everywhere. At bars, at restaurants, and at parties, where Julia left to use the bathroom and returned to find a pretty white stranger in her seat, her face tilted up at Colin in admiration. "Don't worry about me," he said. "I'm excited for you." But I am worried, Julia thought. She watched from across the room as he buttoned his pressed blue shirt, his body turned away from her. Her friends often joked that Julia tried to live an ascetic life, orderly and above moral reproach, but mess seemed to find her anyways. Back in New York, she worked full-time as a bookkeeper at an arts organization. She liked that finance used a different side of her brain and carried very little emotional weight. This was the justification she gave to anyone who asked her why she was an accountant trying to be a writer. While leaving her office at night, she wished that her writing would tidy itself up like sums in a spreadsheet, columns that revealed their logic across orderly rows. On her last day of work before the residency, her department brought in a cluster of silver foil balloons and a cake with strawberry icing. She had volunteered to work part-time, and the job would be waiting for her when she returned. "You're lucky that they let you get away with that," Colin said. His words made her feel powerful. She walked home with the balloons in her hand and popped them, one by one, in her apartment that night, pushing the air out of delicately punched holes. Thank you.
Folks, it is 7:55. Melanie Eliana, I think that's a record. Will all the readers present and at home please stand? How about a round of applause for our readers here tonight? Well, that's it. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for being here. The anthology is on sale at the bookstore, and cheers and good night.